welcome our next speaker, Eric Lin, a senior manager. Today he'll be presenting Power Apps Portal Integration with Dynamics 365 CE. Please stick around after Eric's session for a live Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Eric Lind, and it's my pleasure today to present you the session on Power Apps Portal integration with Dynamics 365 CE, also known as customer engagement. Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to thank DynamicsCon and all the sponsors for organizing this wonderful event and everyone that participates. I also like to take a moment to introduce my organization's activities. For those who may not know, we are a global consulting firm, and we offer solutions to our customers in technology, finance, data analytics, risk and compliance. I'm a senior manager at the firm, and I lead our Dynamics 365 CE practice out of our Toronto, Canada office. So the agenda for today, I will go over some brief introductions about the history of the Power Apps portal. We'll talk about the different steps, how we can create the portal instance when we integrate with our Dynamics environment. I'll walk through some of the key Dynamics, the portal features, including entity list, entity forms, web forms, how we do document upload. We'll look at the access and securities, and I'll do a small demo and before concluding with some pricing information, and of course, having some time at the end for Q&A. So a little bit about the history of the Power Apps portal. As some of you may know, Microsoft acquired the portal technology through the acquisition of ADX Studio portals back around 2015. And since then, Microsoft has continued to invest on the portal technologies, releasing a lot of different features and functionalities, and gradually transitioned the portal to Dynamics 365 portal around 2018. Since then, Microsoft has continued to revamp the overall platforms, and with the introduction of the Power Platforms, Microsoft has launched the latest Power Apps portals in 2019. So the Power Apps portal is provisioned as an app, just like in Power Apps, for those of you who may be familiar with model-driven apps or Canvas apps. So the portal as an app is part of the overall Power Platforms. It seamlessly integrates with the overall Dynamics 365 CE platforms, so including the different CE applications such as sales, customer service. The portal supports low-code and responsive design, allowing external users of organizations to interact with different data records stored in Dataverse, or what's known as Common Data Service, by the portal interface. In the Power Apps portal, when building the different portal features and capabilities, developers or portal designers can leverage the different templates that Microsoft has provided within the Power Platforms, such as the community portals, partner portals, customer service portals, employee self-service portals, and so on and so forth. The steps to create a portal instance is pretty simple and straightforward. So we will log in to the Power Platform environment. We will first of all connect to the appropriate Dynamics 365 CE instance. And from there, we would choose to either provision the portal using one of the portal templates or creating a portal by using the custom portal template features. Once we have the portal environment set up, we'll be able to configure and customize the portal using a combination of the portal editors, which is within the overall Power Apps environment, as well as working in the portal management app within the Dynamics 365 instance. And we'll walk through those in my demo. So let's talk about some of the key features or components that we would commonly work with when it comes to developing a Power Apps portal. The first one is entity list. So for those of you who are familiar with Dynamics 365 solutions, entity list in the Power Apps portal is nothing more than the views in Dynamics 365. So at the very high level, as a developers or portal makers, we will first of all, configure and set up the desired, entity views in our Dynamics 365 solutions. And we will then expose that to the Power Apps portal interface as an entity list. So similar to working with views in Dynamics 365, entity list supports sorting of different field columns. It supports paginations, when viewing through multiple records, through multiple pages. Of course, there are some limitations when working with views or entity lists in Power Apps portals. So one of which is multi-select option set is not supported. So moving on to entity forms. So again, if we look from the perspective of Dynamics 365, entity forms is similar to how we would configure and set up the different entity forms in Dynamics 365. So once we are done with configuring and customize the entity form in Dynamics 365, we will then expose the forms onto the Power Apps portal, known as the entity form component. So using the entity forms and exposing it on the portals, we will be able to allow portal users to view data, through Dynamics records, and to make updates and be able to exchange different information through the portal web interface. In addition to that, entity forms in Power Apps portal also contains additional metadata features that will allow advanced configurations beyond what's traditionally out of the box through Dynamics 365 entity form customizations. Moving on to the next key feature is what's known as web forms. So web form is very similar to entity forms. It performs all the same tasks that an entity form can do. But in addition to that, it supports additional features such as allowing the capability to set up different what's known as web form steps, and also to set up different branching logics. So based on certain conditions, we will be able to trigger different web form steps to either load entire forms or to load different sections of the forms. At the high level, the benefit of having the web forms is to help guide the portal users through working with different sections on the forms as they complete different data in different sections. Another key feature that we would often work with when setting up and working with the Power Apps portal is to introduce the ability to upload documents, allowing portal users to view the documents, to make edits. So the way it works at the very high level is that with Power Apps portal, integrate very seamlessly with SharePoint Online, similar to how we would integrate SharePoint with Dynamics 365. So at a high level, the portal users will be able to upload a document to the portal interface, and the document will be stored in SharePoint against the respective entity records in Dynamics. So similar to Dynamics 365, when it comes to the Power Apps portal, there's also the underlying access and securities. And the way it works when it comes to the portal is to work with entity permissions, which really defines the access scope and the different permissions based on which portal users will be able to access different entity records to the portal interface. Once we have the entity permissions defined, we will link the entity permissions to web roles. So web roles at a very high level is very similar to the user secure roles in Dynamics 365. Out of the box, we have the administrator web roles, the authenticator user web roles, and the anonymous users web roles. But the web roles would not do anything, would not really have the underlying permissions defined unless the entity permissions have been set up and linked to the web roles. Finally, we have the web page access control rule. So through the rule, we will be able to define which page on the portal we want to allow the portal users to see and access. So these are the three common components when it comes to the Power Apps portal in terms of defining the access and the securities. So let's dive into a small demo to help illustrate those concepts that I just covered. So I'm going to bring up this demo environment. So this is our Dynamics 365 demo environment that I've set up here. And in this demo environment, I have set up a contact called Ben Foster's. So this is going to be the contact record that represents our portal users in this particular demo. So every time when a user has been provisioned with access to the Power Apps portal, behind the scene, the system will automatically create a contact record in Dynamics 365 corresponding to that portal users. So in this example, we have Ben Foster as our portal user, and we have the Ben Foster contact record in our Dynamics 365 instance. So let me bring up the Power Platform environment. So this is the environment based on which we will provision our Power Apps portals. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we are connected to the right Dynamics 365 instance. So in this case, in my demo, the instance is Pro Canada TC. So once I'm in the right environment, on the left-hand side, I will click on Create. And here I will have the options to create and provision, our Power Apps portal based on one of the templates that Microsoft has provided, such as the community portal template, the customer self-service portal template, the partner template, so on and so forth. So in our demo today, we are not going to use these templates. So in fact, we are going to create our portal based on the customer portal, which means we are going to create our portal from scratch. So I have already created our portal before our demo. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to click on Apps. And on this list, we will see this portal app that I pre-created called Productivity Demo Portal. So this is the portal, the Power Apps portal app that I pre-created prior to this demo using the custom portal in the creation process without leveraging any of the pre-built template. So once I have the portal, the framework, the app provisions, and usually the very first time when we provision this, it takes some time, for the system to set up this app. So once I have this set up, I can click on Edit, and this will launch our portal editor. So within the editors, here we can, quickly create different, pages and, add additional, different components to our Power Apps portal page. So when I expand on the page menu, so here we could see some of the different, pages that I've already set up for this demo. So, pages such as my contact info, my cases, submit case, and submit case web forms. So once I have all the different pages set up, And actually, let me go into one of the page, my contact info. So on this page, so once this loads, we will see that I've embedded one of the components that we have described previously on my slide. So in this case, I have an entity list, which I've embedded onto this page. So on the right-hand side, we can see that this particular entity list, so the name I've given in this example is my contact info. And this entity list is linked to my contact entity in Dynamics 365. And this is also linked to the view all contact, which is one of the system views as part of the contact entity. So let's take a look at the runtime experience when I browse this portal. So to browse the portal, I will simply click on Browse Website. So we're gonna give it a few seconds when it loads. And while I'm loading the portal website, so in this case, I'm logging as myself, in this case, the system administrators. So what I would actually like to show you is the experience from the portal users. So let me bring up this other web browsers. So in this web browser, I'm logging to the portal as Ben Foster, as you can see. The name of the portal login users. So once I'm logging to the portal as Ben Foster's, I can go to this particular page called My Contact Info. And here you will see the entity list that we just saw in our portal editor. So in this case, since I'm logging as Ben Foster, the system basically displays the key contact information related to the Ben Foster contact record. So including the name, the job title, the email, the phone number, and the address. So again, this is essentially pulling the view from Dynamics 365. So if we want to add any additional field columns to this view, or to remove certain columns from this view, we will simply do that through our Dynamics 365 solutions, as we would normally do when we configure the views. And once we publish the solution in Dynamics 365, the changes will take effect in real time, and the data will be synced in real time back to the portal interface. So this is an example of exposing the entity list onto the portal interface by leveraging the entity views in Dynamics. So let's take a look at another example of the entity list through this other menu called My Cases. So when I click on My Cases, so this is another portal web page that I've set up in my portal editor. And on the portal editor, I've embedded an entity list, which is linked to the case entity in Dynamics. So if I go back to my portal editors, and if I go to My Cases, so here you will see the experience from a portal editor perspective, where we are linking an entity list to the case entities, and also in this case, the all cases view against that case entity in Dynamics. So this is experience in the editor, and when we go to the runtime. So again, let me go back to the portal experience from the perspective of Ben Foster. So in this case, this is displaying the cases that Ben Foster has submitted to the system. So here we could see the case title, the priority of the case, who the customer is, in this case, Ben Foster, and the status of the case. Again, if we want to configure this view, whether or not we want to add additional columns or remove the columns, or to perform different sortings, we can easily do that through configuring this particular view in our Dynamics 365 solutions, publishing the changes, and those changes will then take effect in real time back to the portal interface. So while we're looking at the My Cases menus, what we'd like to show you next is how we can work with the entity forms, to update different information through the portal interface. So let me click on this drop down and click on the page that says Submit Case. So this is a page that I have set up in my portal editor. So again, let me flip back to the portal editor and go to the Submit Case page. So once this loads, you will see that on this particular page, I've embedded the entity forms as a component. So on the left-hand side, under the components menu, this is where we can, add the different portal components onto the page. So we have the list, and in this case, we have embedded the entity forms onto this particular page. On the right-hand side, we could see that this particular entity forms is linked to our case entity in Dynamics. And this is linked to one of the case form called Web Create Case. So again, let me go back to the runtime. So, as Ben Foster's on the portal interface, so just some simple fields that I've set up on this particular, forms on the case entities. This will allow Ben Foster to, enter different data and be able to submit a new case. So let's submit one case. So for instance, problem with my phone. Notice that the system recognized the user who is currently logged into the portal and automatically populates the name of the login user in the customer field. Under case type, we can select, for example, problems, and I can submit additional, information related to this issues. For instance, I have some issues with my phone batteries, please investigate. Once I'm happy with the information, I will hit submit. And this will submit the information in real time and create a new case in real time back in Dynamics. So let's actually go to our Dynamics environment. So at the bottom, let's go to our cases. And here we could see we have a new case record, problem with my phone. And we can see that this is a record that we just submitted through the portal and it's created in real time in Dynamics. So as a Dynamics user, someone's working at for example the customer service department of the organizations, the customer service agent will be able to quickly see the new case records created in Dynamics, perhaps through the dashboard, and be able to walk towards the case resolutions. So let's go back again to the portal as Ben Fostered. So in the next example, let's go to the submit case web form experience. So this is the experience I would like to illustrate the difference between submitting the case records using the entity form versus the web forms. So what we saw earlier when we submit the new case records, that's through submitting the case record through the entity form experience. So if I go back to the portal editor, let me go back to the portal editors. And if I go to this page called Submit Case Web Forms, so this is the page where I've embedded the web form component instead of the entity forms. So what's the main difference here? So now if I go back to our Dynamics instance, So recall in one of my presentation slides, I mentioned that while working with the Power Apps portal configurations, we can work with the changes through the portal editor, as well as through the portal management within our Dynamics environment. So in portal management, so on the left-hand side, we have a components called Web Forms. So I'm going to click on Web Forms, and I'm going to open the Web Forms that I pre-created for this demo called Submit Case Web Forms Demo Portal. So when I opened this web form record, there's a few different properties I'd like to walk through next. So this web form is linked to our demo portal instance. And if I go into the web form steps, we could see that I have 3 different web form steps that I've defined here. And the starting step is the general step as indicated here, the start step. So what does each one of these steps mean? So if I go back to our dynamic solutions, and if I opened our case forms from one of my solutions here, so go into the case entities and I go into forms. So I have a forms that I've set up called web create case and also web create case number 2. So the web create case is the one that I use when I expose the case, fields of information for the portal users to submit on the portal through the entity forms and examples. So the web create case number 2, this is the form that I've exposed to the portal through the web forms scenario that we are looking at this moment. So on this particular form layout, so notice I have different sections that are set up on this particular case forms. So I've set up 3 tabs. I have the general tab, I have a details tab, and also I have a document tab. So back on our portal management, if I go back, so I have set up these 3 web form steps. So each one corresponding to the different tabs on our case, web create case forms. So the idea here is that when we go to the runtime on the portal, instead of display the entire case forms on the portal page, it will first display only the field, the section that's underneath the general tab on the forms. So that's our first step. And once we fill in the data of the information, the system will then take us, the portal user, to the next tab, which is the details tab. And then finally, the last tab, which is the documents tab, to allow the portal user to submit the documents. So this is why we are defining the different web form steps in this web forms under this web form properties. So let's take a look at what the experience look like when we go to the runtime. So here again, looking at the submit case web forms page as Ben Foster's. So notice at the top we have the different 3 steps that the system recognizes in terms from the different web form steps that we have defined. So the first step is the general tabs. So let's enter a title for this particular case that we're submitting. So for example, problem with form screens, and case type, let's select problems. So when I click on next, it will take me to the next step in my case submission process. So the next step is the detail step. And this is basically pulling in the sections and the field that I have set up, configured on my case form under the details tab. So let's enter some descriptions. I have some issues with my phone screen. Please troubleshoot. And let's click on next. So this will take us to the last step, which is the document step. So in here, this is where, as a portal users, I will be able to, submit, a document as an attachment, to our records. So the reason why we see this particular permission error message, so this is by design. I've set up for this demo to showcase that we need to set up the appropriate entity permissions in order to view the documents and also the document subgrid. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this particular case record. So again, once this is submitted, so in real time, we will see the new case records created in our Dynamics instance. Problem with my phone screen. So this is a record that we just submitted through the portal. And in real time, very quickly, the record is created. And as a Dynamics 365 user, again, I'll be able to view this record information and to do my work accordingly. So notice when we saw that error runtime in terms of the lack of permissions on the portal, so that's defined through the entity permissions as part of the underlying access and the security models when we're setting up the overall permissions in the Power Apps portal. So let's take a look at how that's set up. So again, in portal management, so on the left-hand side, under securities, I can go into entity permissions. So here we could see some of the entity permissions that I've set up prior to this demo. So one of the entity permissions is on, for example, if I scroll down here, so I have one entity permission I've set up called my case entity permissions. So this entity permissions basically defines that as the portal login user, I would only be able to see the case records that I've submitted on the portal. Because obviously, as a system admin, I do not want, the portal user to see all the cases in the systems. So how is this defined? So we could see that, under the scope, we have defined the contact as the scope criteria. What this means is that it will only display all the relevant case record on the portal, whereby the portal login user, is the contact, or in other words, the customers of that contact record. So again, from the portal user's perspective, only seeing the cases that the portal user has submitted. So once we have this particular entity permission record defined, as I mentioned in our presentation slide, we will need to link this entity permission to a web roles. So if I scroll down here, we have a web role sections, and we could see that we have a web role called authenticate users set up in the system. And we have this particular entity permissions linked to this particular web roles. So when I go into this web roles, and when I go to the related records and I go to contact, here we could see that the contact Ben Foster, who is the portal login user, has been provisioned, been granted access to this particular web role. So this is how in this example, how Ben Foster would inherit and receive the different permissions and privilege on the portal. Based on which Ben Foster will be able to, access, the different, portal permissions, the different data accordingly. So that's the high-level demo I would like to take you through in describing how we could set up, key components when working with the portal. So we look at, working with the entity list, the entity forms, the web forms, and also the underlying implications when working with the entity permissions and the web roles. So before concluding the presentation today, I'd like to share with you some of the pricing information as advertised on the Microsoft website when it comes to acquiring licenses in working with the Power Apps portal. So at the very high level, in working with the Power Apps portal, the portal can be purchase in terms of access based on the user logins or based on the page views. So again, these are public information that Microsoft has published and shared on the Microsoft website as per the link which I've shared below here. When it comes to the login sessions, that really means, within, a 24-hour window, doesn't really matter how many times the same portal users have logged into the portal, as long as it's within the 24 hours period, those multiple logins by the same portal user will be counted as one login. So as an organization, at this particular price tag, the organization will be able to provide 100 logins to the portal users, and additional logins could be purchased. Similarly, instead of purchasing the portal usage based on logins, organizations can also purchase the portal usage based on the number of the page views by the portal users per month. And again, additional page views can be purchased as needed. So that concludes my presentation today. I would like to again, take a moment to, thank DynamicsCon for this opportunities, and also to everyone who has, voted my sessions. It's very much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed the session today, and hopefully you are able to take some useful information out of the presentation deck, as well as a demo, to hopefully give you some different ideas in your journey as you explored, working with the Power Apps portal for integrations with your Dynamics 365 environment. Please don't forget to post any questions that you may have in our conference chat Q&A, and I'll be very happy to respond, look into your inquiries next. Hi everyone, thank you for watching my sessions. So we are in the Q&A chat. Welcome if you have any questions, comments for me. Okay, so I see there's a question from John regarding calendar controls. So the question is, are there calendar controls which can be put on the portal, which will give users drag and drop capabilities, added capabilities similar to the behavior of the Outlook calendar? So I have not myself, from my experience, implement embed any such calendar controls. But my understanding is that we will be able to, apply and embed Canvas apps controls onto the portal page. So I would imagine that we should be able to achieve something similar to that. Any other questions, comments from anyone? So one thing I'd like to maybe share with everyone from my experience working with the portal is that It's still a relatively young product. From when it was released, launched by Microsoft. So I would say, from experience, working with customers' requirements, we, typically would, look at, out of the box capabilities with some customizations through CSS, JavaScript or HTML to meet, specific client requirements. With the intention to keep the platform stable and making sure that performance is good. At the same time, there are a lot of new features being released continuously by Microsoft. Integrations, with the overall Power Platform, with Power Apps, Power Automate. I touch upon integration with SharePoint. So there's a lot of new features and capabilities being released. So we have another question in the chat from John. The question is how easy it is to control what field appear on the portal. So it's very easy to control that. So essentially, the field that you would expose on the portal form, that comes from basically the entity forms that you would configure from Dynamics. So if we are describing from the context of the Dynamics integration with the portal. So what you could do, and this is a common scenario, when working with clients implementation, is that we would create separate entity forms specific for display to the portal. So if you are working in Dynamics, you would have different entity forms that you display to users within Dynamics. But we would typically suggest you create separate entity forms for the purpose of capturing and displaying those fields onto the portal. As I was demonstrating, in the demo, whether or not, using the entity forms or using the web forms, you will be able to, fairly easily expose those fields. Another question in the chat is, what are the possibilities of embedding graph into portals? Can we add custom besides Dynamics or Power BI? So I believe it's possible, although again, my experience in terms of embedding graph or working with graph has been limited to integrations with Power BI or just the out of the box configuration with Dynamics. But again, I'm pretty certain you will be able to implement your custom graph and expose onto the portals. So while we are waiting for additional questions, perhaps some limitations from experience I could share with you. So going back to the earlier question about field. So some limitations when it comes to working or exposing fields on the portal. As one of them, one common limitation would be working with a multi-select option set. So while multi-select option set field is supported, available in the Dynamics environment, unfortunately, it's not supported at this moment on the portal page. So you would not be able to, for example, display a multi-select option set pick list on the portal page. So here's one question from Tom. Is the redeem invitations authentications going away? Seems like there have been issues with sending invitations. Is that working now? So I'm not certain if it's going away. And in my experience, I actually have not really had any problems that I have run into in terms of sending invitations to users. there is some changes so I'm not sure if this is what you have done, but there's some tweaks and changes that you need to do to the workflows in Dynamics that's responsible for sending out that invitation. So if you have not made any appropriate changes, so perhaps that could be one of the reasons why you may be having some issues there. But from personal experience, I haven't had encountered any problems. If you like to, for Tom, if you like to maybe reach out to me separately, I'm only happy to look into the type of the issues that may you have. Any questions from anyone? Again, in my demo, I know I only had limited time, but I'd like to maybe just take a moment to discuss more about the security, when working with the portals. So in Dynamics, so we have the user security roles where we, define the different, access levels, permissions for the different entities that the user could access in the system. So it's slightly different when it comes to defining those permissions, what we call entity permissions on the portal front. So depending on the level of the permissions that you need to define, for those who have already worked with it, you need to be aware of, for example, the type of the relationship that you're working on, with the entity, the records. And then it's important, I guess, as best practice to sort of lay out the different type of permissions, entity permission that you may wish to reserve for, system main users or power users versus regular users. And then to have those permissions, assigned to the different web roles accordingly. So from my experience in working with a previous client project, sometimes it could get a little bit, confusing for clients, ITs or users, people who may need to maintain the system going forward once we're done with the project. If those entity permissions are not named in a way that's clearly understood by those users, they could have a tough time trying to sort of figure out what permissions, entity permission to be assigned to different web roles. So I think again, naming convention is important. Also, documentation is also important. Any other questions, comment? So one of the questions touch upon graph. So maybe another experience I could share with you, not specifically related to graph, but related to customizations on the portal page, is to, for example, creating custom buttons for portal users to download reports, such as a PDF report. So those type of features, we can fairly easily implement those with some pretty basic easy customizations, to output data to specific PDF format, in this case that we have implemented for our customers. So here's another question from Rob in the chat window about, can you pull in information to the portal from other systems, not just Dynamics? So again, I've only worked with the integration with the portal with Dynamics, but I think there might be a ability to pull in information, from Power Automate. Again, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, based on what could be possible. So we can implement Power Automate with a portal, so we can leverage the connectors from Power Automate to, for example, read, retrieve, and pull information from other source systems onto the portal page. So that could be possible. But again, I have not, personally done that, integrating portal with other systems other than Dynamics. Anything? Any other questions, comments? So here's another question from John about, have I implemented any project with chatbot on the portal? So I have not, but I do know that this is possible, supported. So again, when it comes to the Power Platforms, there's a lot of new features, including the chatbot that can be integrated with both the portal and as well as the model-driven apps in Dynamics. Again, I'm not sure if everyone had a chance to capture my LinkedIn invite as part of my presentations. I will quickly share my contact here in case anyone may like to reach out to me separately if you have any additional questions. More than happy to connect and help looking into any inquiry that you may have. So I'm just gonna paste my LinkedIn contact in this chat window for anyone who may wish to reach out to me offline. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I know it's end of the day. Again, I want to thank you, everyone who voted for me and attended the session today, as well as the organizer, the entire Dynamics Con committee for giving me this opportunity to, present the session to you. Hopefully, you are able to take something useful away from the presentations. It's very nice meeting you here. Hope everyone continue to stay safe and healthy, and have a nice evening and good rest of the day. Thank you very much.